tragedy struck that no one could have ever anticipated. Jemma Warren, a name that once represented hope, strength, and a bright future, became forever linked to a heartbreaking story of loss. But what led to this devastating moment? How did a promising life take such a tragic turn? Stay with us as we uncover the untold details behind Jemma Warren's heartbreaking tragedy. Jemma Warren was born into a world that didn't always make space for dreamers. Yet from her earliest years, she defied that limitation with pure spirit and imagination. Born in a modest suburb on the outskirts of Manchester, England, Jemma was the kind of child who lit up any room she entered. With sparkling eyes, a head full of wild ideas, and an insatiable curiosity, she was a creative soul from the beginning. Her mother, a nurse who often worked late shifts, always said Jemma had music in her bones, and her father, a car mechanic with calloused hands and a quiet demeanor, proudly cheered on his daughter's earliest attempts at singing, dancing, and storytelling. Even at the age of 5, Jemma would gather her cousins and siblings in the living room, turn a blanket into a cape, and put on a one-girl show, complete with a makeshift stage and dramatic monologues about queens, witches, and faraway lands. But it wasn't just make-believe. Jemma had a natural gift. At school, she excelled in creative writing and music, often winning praise from teachers who recognized her emotional depth and expression. At 8 years old, she wrote a poem that left her entire class in tears. It was about a lonely bird searching for its flock, and in many ways, it foreshadowed her own journey. Jemma also discovered her love for performing arts in local theater productions. Whether she was cast in a major role or simply part of the ensemble, she gave every scene her full heart. Her drama teacher once said that Jemma had the kind of vulnerability on stage that couldn't be taught, something raw and magnetic that pulled the audience in. At home, her bedroom walls were plastered with posters of her idols: Whitney Houston, Judy Garland, and Amy Winehouse, women who carried pain and passion in equal measure, unknowingly paving the emotional template for Jemma's own life. Despite the encouragement from her parents and teachers, the family's financial situation made it difficult to invest in lessons, travel, or performance gear. Still, Jemma never let that stop her. She practiced her vocals using YouTube karaoke tracks, taught herself choreography from music videos, and wrote entire short plays in old notebooks. Her dreams were big, but they never seemed out of reach, at least not in those early years. This was the Jemma before the world got heavy, before tragedy began to write its way into her life. A girl full of potential, fire, and fragile hope. The kind of hope that, for a while, looked like it might carry her to the stars. As Jemma's star seemed destined to rise, no one could have predicted the crushing force of the events that would soon threaten to derail her journey. Just when she thought her dreams were within arm's reach, life threw a curveball that would leave scars far deeper than anyone could imagine. What happened next tested the very core of her spirit, forcing Jemma to grapple with a painful reality that no one could have foreseen. Would she rise above the heartbreak and continue to pursue her dreams? Or would the weight of this new challenge prove too much to bear? The answer would come in ways no one, including Jemma herself, could have anticipated. As much as Jemma Warren's childhood was filled with imagination, talent, and the flickering hope of a brighter future, that light began to dim when the first real fracture tore through her life: her parents' sudden and deeply painful separation. Jemma was only 10 years old when the tension that had been quietly simmering at home finally exploded into something she could no longer ignore. Arguments that used to take place behind closed doors began happening in the open. Her father, once calm and supportive, grew distant and irritable. Her mother, who had always found time to braid Jemma's hair before school despite long hospital shifts, became overwhelmed with exhaustion and heartbreak. What had once been a home filled with laughter and makeshift living room performances now echoed with silence and slammed doors. Jemma didn't fully understand what was happening at first. One day, she came home from school to find her father's belongings packed in black bin bags, and just like that, he was gone. The weeks that followed were a blur. Her mother tried to hold it together for the children's sake, but Jemma could sense the deep sorrow sitting just behind her eyes. Financial pressures multiplied. With only one income, the family had to move to a smaller flat, which meant Jemma had to transfer schools and leave behind her childhood best friend. The trauma of the divorce began seeping into every corner of her life. She stopped writing in her journal, abandoned her theater rehearsals, and even skipped meals. For the first time, she no longer wanted to perform. Her teachers noticed the change. The once vibrant girl who had lit up the classroom with her poetry now sat quietly in the back, staring out the window or scribbling dark drawings in her notebook. But it wasn't just the divorce itself, it was the ripple effect. Jemma began to internalize the conflict, believing that somehow she was the reason things fell apart. No one told her otherwise. She blamed herself for the fights, for not being good enough, for not making them happy enough to stay together. These toxic thoughts rooted themselves in her psyche and lingered for years. This was the first time Jemma learned what real heartbreak felt like. Not from a lover or a friend, but from the collapse of the very foundation on which her young life had been built. And though she didn't realize it at the time, this emotional devastation would shape the decisions she made and the relationships she formed moving forward. It was the first in a long line of tragedies that would test her strength, and she was only just getting started. As the weight of her parents' separation settled deeper into Jemma's soul, she could never have anticipated the shocking turn her life was about to take. Just when she thought things couldn't get worse, another unexpected tragedy would come barreling into her life, completely altering her trajectory. But before we reveal what happened next, there's something crucial you need to understand. A series of hidden secrets, some dark, others buried deep within her heart, had begun to unravel, and they were about to challenge everything Jemma thought she knew about herself. Could she survive what was coming? Would she ever find a way to overcome her demons? Or would they break her entirely? Her battle was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. And as Jemma would soon discover, some scars never truly heal. But what was this new tragedy? And how would it define the woman she would ultimately become? The answers are closer than you think, but they may be even darker than you ever imagined. After the emotional wreckage of her parents' divorce, Jemma Warren could have faded into the background. She could have surrendered her dreams to the overwhelming weight of pain and uncertainty, but something in her refused to stay small. By the time she was 15, Jemma had started finding herself again, piece by piece. The catalyst was a school talent show she reluctantly entered after a teacher encouraged her to share her voice. When Jemma stepped on that stage, barefoot and trembling, and sang her version of "I Have Nothing" by Whitney Houston, the entire auditorium went still. Her voice cracked in the beginning, but then something beautiful happened. She closed her eyes, tapped into that ocean of emotion inside her, and sang not just the lyrics but her story. The performance brought teachers to tears and led to a standing ovation that lasted well after the final note. For the first time in years, Jemma felt something she thought she'd lost. That moment became a turning point. Local organizers began inviting her to perform at small charity events and open mic nights. A video of her singing went viral on social media, and soon after, she caught the attention of a regional talent scout. With no formal training, no vocal coach, and no rich family backing her, Jemma stood out as a raw, unpolished talent with soul far beyond her years. She quickly gained a following on YouTube, where she began uploading acoustic covers and snippets of her original songs. Lyrics that often spoke of heartbreak, resilience, and dreams deferred. Her audience grew with every video, drawn not just to her voice, but to the authenticity she exuded. She wasn't trying to be perfect. She was just real, and that resonated. Around this time, she was invited to audition for a televised talent competition. Although the producers were more interested in flashier acts, Jemma's haunting rendition of a stripped-down ballad earned her a spot. Though she didn't win the show, she became a fan favorite and walked away with a growing fan base, a modest recording offer, and something even more important. For the first time since her childhood, the stars seemed within reach. She was no longer the girl crying herself to sleep in a cramped flat. She was an artist on the rise, proving to herself and the world that beauty could come from broken places. But even as the light of recognition began to shine on her, shadows lingered in the background. Jemma's ascent into the public eye brought attention, but also new pressures, expectations, and wounds waiting to reopen. Fame, as she would soon learn, was a double-edged sword, and behind every spotlight, darkness waited just out of frame. As Jemma's world began to shift, she couldn't have predicted the challenges that awaited her. Fame had a way of testing even the strongest, and soon, the very thing that brought her hope started to unravel. Everything she thought she knew about herself. With whispers of scandal, rising tensions within her personal life, and the struggle to maintain authenticity in an industry built on image, Jemma found herself facing battles that no one had warned her about. Would she be able to stay true to her roots, or would the pressure of her newfound fame break her spirit once again? And then, just as everything seemed to be spiraling out of control, Jemma received a phone call, one that would change the course of her career and her life forever. What was the call about? Who was on the other end of the line? The answer would either pull her deeper into the chaos or offer her a chance to escape it all. Would this be the break she needed, or the final twist in her journey to redemption? To the outside world, Jemma Warren was living a dream most people only fantasized about. She had gone from a struggling teen with a cracked heart to a rising star with a growing fan base, an online presence, and performance offers that hinted at a promising future. Her social media was filled with filtered smiles, behind-the-scenes giggles, and polished snippets of new songs. To fans, she radiated confidence and talent, but behind the curated posts and glowing interviews was a young woman quietly unraveling. The very attention she had longed for started to feel suffocating. As her fame increased, so did the pressure to always be on, to always deliver, and to never show weakness. Every mistake became a headline, every choice up for judgment. Jemma began to feel like a product rather than a person, something to be consumed rather than understood. Behind closed doors, her mental health was deteriorating. The expectations placed upon her were relentless. She was constantly being compared to other artists, told to sing like one, dress like another, and speak more like someone else entirely. Managers began pushing her toward more commercial sounds, suggesting she alter her image to fit a more marketable mold. The lyrics she wrote, raw, painful, personal, were often dismissed as too sad or not catchy enough. What made her authentic was being stripped away bit by bit. At just 19, Jemma was in rooms with people twice her age, making decisions about her future with little regard for her emotional well-being. She often left those meetings in tears, then had to dry her eyes quickly before stepping on stage or facing fans. The world didn't want to see her cry. It wanted her to sparkle. She began to self-isolate. Friends who had once been her lifeline were now distant, either left behind by her rising fame or pushed away by Jemma herself, who didn't want anyone to see how much she was struggling. At night, she suffered panic attacks that left her gasping for air. She turned to journaling again, but the pages this time were filled with darker thoughts, fears of losing herself, of never being enough, of being loved only for her voice and not the broken girl behind it. Rumors began to swirl in tabloids, whispers of breakdowns, rehab stints, and erratic behavior. Jemma rarely responded, allowing speculation to swirl, too exhausted to defend herself. What fans didn't see was how desperately she was holding it all together, walking a tightrope between success and self-destruction. The mask she wore in public, smiling for cameras, thanking fans, acting grateful, grew heavier with each passing day. And eventually, like all masks worn too long, it began to crack. For Jemma Warren, the slow collapse of her inner world reached its boiling point when the one person she thought she could count on turned out to be the one who hurt her most. At the height of her rising career, when she was being labeled the next big thing by music blogs and hailed for her soulful lyrics, she placed her complete trust in her longtime manager, a man she'd known since her early days on the performance circuit. He had presented himself as a father figure, someone who understood her past and claimed to protect her future. He had helped shape her early branding, gotten her gigs, and even stood beside her during her first televised performance. But behind the scenes, he had been slowly tightening his control, managing her finances, overseeing her creative decisions, and isolating her from people who questioned his intentions. Jemma, emotionally vulnerable and already questioning her self-worth, mistook his manipulation for loyalty. It all came crashing down when she discovered that he had been embezzling from her accounts for nearly 2 years. Tens of thousands of pounds were missing, money she had worked tirelessly to earn, gone without a trace. Even more devastating was the realization that he had been signing contracts in her name, committing her to performances she never agreed to, and rejecting opportunities without telling her. When the truth unraveled, it wasn't just a financial betrayal, it was the betrayal of trust, the exploitation of a broken girl trying to find her footing in a brutal industry. Jemma was devastated. She'd been warned by colleagues and even a few close friends that something felt off, but she had defended him, convinced that he was the only one truly in her corner. What followed was one of the darkest periods in her life. Legal battles ensued, draining her emotionally and financially. Public statements were crafted and released, but behind the scenes, Jemma was unraveling. The betrayal reawakened all the insecurities she had buried since childhood, that she was unlovable, easy to discard, destined to be abandoned or used. She stopped writing music. She missed shows. Rumors of a nervous breakdown weren't just rumors, they were a reality, though few knew the depth of her despair. She stopped appearing on social media. Friends who had once been part of her inner circle stopped hearing from her altogether. She withdrew completely. It wasn't just about losing money or even losing her manager. It was the emotional freefall that came from realizing she'd built her life around someone who didn't value her as a person. It shattered what little faith she had left. And in that dark, isolating space, Jemma reached a point where she didn't know if she could, or even wanted to, recover. After the betrayal that left Jemma Warren both emotionally and financially gutted, she disappeared from the public eye almost entirely. No Instagram posts, no music releases, no interviews, just silence. But while the world moved on, curious about her whereabouts, behind the curtain, Jemma was fighting the most grueling battle of her life, one that didn't come with stage lights or applause. Isolated in a small flat in East London, far from the glossy world she had once inhabited, Jemma was trapped inside a prison of her own thoughts. The depression that had long lingered beneath the surface now took full control. Simple tasks became impossible. Getting out of bed, brushing her hair, even eating, everything became a mountain she couldn't climb. And with the mental darkness came something even more dangerous: dependency. What started as a way to numb the pain, an occasional sleeping pill to calm her anxiety or a glass of wine to dull her panic, slowly evolved into a dependency on substances that gave her even the briefest moments of relief. It wasn't glamorous. There were no wild party stories or tabloid scandals, just a slow, quiet descent into addiction. She hid it well, especially from the few friends and family members still trying to reach her. She would say she was just tired or going through a creative rut, but in truth, she was spiraling, and each day became harder to survive than the last. Her once bright eyes dulled. Her body weakened. She started missing doctor's appointments and ignoring calls from therapists who were genuinely trying to help. She didn't want to be saved. She didn't feel worth saving. Then came a physical collapse that changed everything. One evening, alone in her flat, Jemma fainted. Her body, worn down by stress, substance use, and malnutrition, gave out. Paramedics were called by a concerned neighbor, and she was rushed to the hospital. Tests revealed more than just exhaustion. Jemma had developed complications related to substance abuse, and doctors warned her that if she didn't get help, she might not live to see her next birthday. The diagnosis wasn't just a wake-up call, it was a mirror reflecting everything she had tried to bury. She was sick, she was broken, and she was scared. And yet, that moment, the one where she found herself staring at the ceiling of a sterile hospital room, IVs in her arm and fear in her heart, sparked something inside her. It was faint, but it was there, the smallest flicker of a will to live, to fight, to reclaim her story. The journey ahead would be long and brutal, but Jemma was finally beginning to understand that her survival might be the most important performance of her life. The road to recovery for Jemma Warren was anything but straight. It wasn't the kind of story where the hospital stay triggered a neat, linear path to healing. Instead, it was a jagged journey, filled with starts and stops, hope and relapse, progress and backsliding. After her hospitalization, Jemma reluctantly agreed to enter a residential rehab facility tucked away in the countryside, a quiet place where paparazzi couldn't follow and where she could finally begin to face her demons head-on. The early days were brutal. Withdrawal symptoms left her shaking, vomiting, and screaming into pillows. Therapists asked her to unpack traumas she had spent years suppressing. For weeks, she barely spoke during group sessions. She didn't trust anyone, not the counselors, not the nurses, not even herself. But as the days turned into weeks, the fog began to lift.